everybody. Welcome to Wake Up Call, the podcast. I'm your host, Christina Previtt, and joining me today for a special edition of the hashtag FemSquire series is Afshan Ajmiri Giner, a partner at Florio Perrucci and a member of the firm's education practice group. She focuses her practice in education, school law, labor and employment, and representation of local governments and public entities. Welcome, Afshan.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to interview you today because, as you know, with the weather and everything, it's been hard to get this on the calendar. So I'm glad we're finally doing it.
Likewise, because I think we started talking about this almost 2 months ago at this point, so I'm really excited.
Yes, me too. So I always start out with the same question for everyone. Where did you go to college and what did you think you wanted to be when you grow up?
I'll start with where did I went to college because that's easier. So I went to Brown University, which is located in Providence, Rhode Island. That's where I got my undergraduate degree in international relations. What I wanted to be when I grew up changed a lot. So when I was younger, I wanted to be an astronaut, and then I realized by the time I got to high school that physics and the hard sciences were not my thing. But then I kind of was felt driven towards medicine because my grandmother, who is now deceased, really pushed me to be to consider medicine because one of my aunts, her daughter is a doctor, and she thinks it's really important for women to be doctors and professionals and educated. And everybody in the family really emphasizes that. But in general, she really pushed me for it towards it. So when I first started college, I actually was pre-med, and then halfway through college, I was like, this is not what brings me joy in life at all. And while I understand you have to have a job, you also have to love what you do, you know?
Yeah.
So I had taken a class that had to do with international law that got kind of got me interested in law. And then eventually I decided I wanted to be in sort of this legal space. And shortly after college, right after graduation, I worked in a high school as a counselor for a couple of years. And that's when I realized that I wanted to specifically focus on education law and policy.
So I have to back up a little bit. Why did you want to be an astronaut? What was it about that drew you to it?
Very silly, I'll tell you, because I just thought it was really cool to look at, this is where I was very young, right? So I used to like looking at the open sky, and my dad had telescopes because he was really into astronomy, and so we used to go up at night and use his telescopes to look at different planets and stuff. And I thought by the time I would be old enough, we would probably have flying cars, and it would take maybe 2 days to go to go to the moon. And so I really thought it was fascinating, the concept of how, the Earth is in connection to the rest of the planets, and there's so much that's unknown. It's just thought of the unknown and being able to explore. So that's
Yeah.
what it was.
I like that too. It sort of reminds me of Tesla. I mean, Elon Musk wants to, he wants to send people to Mars and he's got all these really incredible goals.
If I qualify, I would definitely volunteer to go because it's just the thought of exploring the unknown is really fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, how many people have really gone to space? Not that many.
Not that many, and there are not a lot of females either who are astronauts, let alone going to space. There are some great female astronauts out there, but I thought it would be really cool.
Yeah, I agree. It would be cool. And I agree, I don't consider myself to have the strongest science background. I know some people say that there's like a science brain and an English verbal brain, but and some people argue that that's not true, but I don't know. I'm not really a science and math person either.
I'm not either, and it's interesting because that's who my dad and my brother and even my mom to a certain degree are very science math heavy. So I don't know where what happened with
Yeah,
me.
I was going to ask you, did you come from a family of doctors or scientists?
So my one of my aunts, she's a doctor, but my dad, he majored in physics. My mom studied economics. didn't finish college, but she, that's what she was going towards. And then my brother majored in physics and applied math, or something along those lines. And I was just like, who does applied math for fun? But apparently my brother, and he does software engineering work. My dad's in, computer engineering. But the rest of the families, actually, believe it or not, are all educators in different capacities. So most of them are in education, and in that space, some are in education related to sciences, others are just in education, across the board in different areas.
I
So it's
love that your grandmother encouraged you to be a doctor. What did your grandmother do?
So she passed, she was a housewife. So when she was very young, her dad passed away. And so she never really got to finish school, and they couldn't necessarily afford to go to college. And then even though she got married, I think she was like 23, 24, which, uh, for us, it's very young, but for, Bangladesh and India, it's like not that young. She loved books. She read probably every book I could think of. She used to finish all the books in a single section of a library within a month. So she loved to read. She was always very interested in education, and that particular generation, my grandparents' generation, from both sides of the family, and their siblings, they're all very educated. All because for them, education was the one way, sort of, to improve your life circumstances. And I the education was very much based in, heavily in, not just in the sciences, but most people were, it was in literature and the arts and English, etc.
Yeah. I always find it interesting too when people, well, I think I'm a little older than you, but I'm going to say generally of our generation, when the grandmoms were the ones encouraging girls to do big things because they didn't always have those same opportunities. They weren't encouraged to do those big things. And I think they really see those opportunities and value them so much more probably than maybe even our generation does because it's just what we've grown up with. But I think sometimes we do take for granted the opportunities that we have now that our grandparents didn't, particularly grandmothers, didn't really have as much of.
No, that's definitely true. I do think that, for instance, when I graduated from college and took a couple of years off just to, figure out, not so much figure out what I wanted to do next. I just wanted to take some time to just, get a feel for, quote unquote, the real world, and figure out which direction I wanted to go, which helped, by the way, because it steered me towards education law. But my grandmother was getting very nervous, and she was, she was always concerned that I would never go and finish school, then get a higher degree. So yeah, it is kind of fascinating because that to me indicates that, I was just taking my privilege of being here, and here as in the United States, and being in, having the options and the choices so much more for granted, and I'm sure
Yeah.
she would love to have the same opportunities and options.
I
Yeah,
guess it's a luxury that we can take some of those things for granted now.
yeah, for sure.
So you're in college, you're realizing this pre-med thing is not going to work out for me. Did your parents and your family really just want you to excel, or were they really pressuring you to do the pre-med?
I think, in South Asian culture, there tends to be this notion of being a doctor, or an scientist or an engineer or something along those lines. They correlate that with, success, and sometimes even, intelligence. Fortunately, my family, while they definitely pushed me very hard towards medicine, a lot of it had to do with, how, the earning capacity, right? When and you lead a comfortable life, et cetera, when you're a doctor. And also, it's important to be, a educated professional woman. Those were the two pieces of it. But when they realized that, my goals were different, and that I was just really, like, internally struggling with the thought of really pursuing medicine, and that I had found this other area that I really, really liked. They were far more understanding and supportive.
So tell me more about the counseling that you did. That had you more interested in education?
The program itself is called National College Advising Corps, and essentially what you do is you serve as a college guide or a college counselor. We like to say college guide because it does differentiate kind of what our role is than a typical counselor in school communities all over the country. We primarily focus on a lot of the low income rural and urban communities where you typically don't see a majority of the students, even attempting college. And if they do, or attempting higher education, and if they do, there is no real support system for them to be able to be successful and complete their, 4-year degree or even a 2-year degree followed by any kind of additional degree. So the purpose of the program was to increase the participation of students coming from those communities in higher education, because there are definitely studies and there's a correlation between higher ed and income and long-term upward mobility. I had the privilege of going back to my old high school, which was great. And so when I went back, I basically developed in conjunction with the school's leadership, the guidance counselors that are already there and doing, what they do on a regular basis to create essentially what I like to say a college going culture. And while I understand that going to college isn't everybody's goal and may not be for everyone, but it should still be available to those who want to. As a result, I got very close to the families and the children and the students. And what I came to realize is all these programs, they're great. And I definitely support all these programs, but there's a systematic issue. And then there are underlying issues that impact education in our country. And one of them is, whether we like to recognize it or not, it's generational, segregation. What started off as racial segregation has definitely impacted how communities were able to expand and grow. And now there's also economic and socioeconomic segregation because certain school communities have higher levels of income and higher levels of resources as a result, and the other school communities don't. So that got me very interested in urban education reform, as well as just education law and policy. So as I started to look into the different ways I could contribute in a way where we're fixing the system, quote unquote, a couple of areas were of interest to me. One was education policy. So I got involved with the the governor of Rhode Island Urban Education Reform Task Force. And then when I started applying to law schools, I really looked at schools that had a public interest component to it. So when I first went to law school, I went in with this idea of going into education policy. And then as I got through law school, I kind of realized that there's this other piece to it where you can deal with the legal issues that come in, and part of the legal issues also impact policymaking. That's kind of how I got interested. I know this is a long-winded explanation of where I,
That's okay. That was a lot of information, but I'm so impressed with the philanthropic work, really, that you were doing at such an early phase in your career and as a young person. There's so many. I feel like I need to just stop what I'm doing right now and go volunteer somewhere, because I feel like you've done far more than I have, and I'm older, and I'm really impressed with your background. I think that's so wonderful that you're doing all those great things for people and for the public. But I have to ask you, to me, it begs the question, why law school? Because there could have been so many other things that you could have gone into. You could have gone into public administration or urban planning, or social work, or any number of other things. Why was law the thing that you decided was for you?
the law degree is so versatile, because a lot of folks that I came across during my time doing that work, a lot of them had law degrees. So whether they were people in the state legislature, whether they were deans at the colleges, whether they were running nonprofit organizations, a lot of them had a legal background. And what I noticed, and that was something that they all also said, is that having that legal background, you can really utilize that in a way, the what you, at least the education, in a way where you can, I guess, get a little bit more respect in the community, if that's one way to put it. But also the legal, the way we are taught to think in law school, the way we're taught to issue spot and come up with solutions and come up with creative solutions, that's what our communities need. And I was like, well, if this is going to arm me to become better at what I do, and to be frank with you, had I not gone to law school, I probably would have stayed in Rhode Island and probably would have been in one of those nonprofit agencies, and maybe, gone to, a local law school night at nights or something. And still, that law degree I thought was very, not so much necessary, but very valuable in being able to contribute to society. And it sounds crazy probably, because most lawyers are like, what are you talking about? Because, but I really, everybody I spoke to that had a law degree, even if they weren't practicing or they gave up practicing, they all felt that that education, that experience, it really helped them bring their organization or bring their skills to, resolve issues, or publicly speak, or whatever it may, to organize. Everybody felt that that I met that had a JD or was an Esquire felt that that was really key in their success and in their ability to do their work.
Yeah, I don't think that sounds crazy at all. I mean, there's a lot of stereotypes about lawyers, and you had mentioned earlier that people kind of see doctors as always being successful, right? But I know there are plenty of doctors that don't make a ton of money, and there are plenty of lawyers that don't make a ton of money like people think. And sadly, like social workers who notoriously don't make a lot of money, there are plenty of lawyers that are doing really good work for the public that aren't doing it because of the satisfaction they get and the contribution that they're making to the community, and not for money, because they're really not making a lot of money. So it doesn't sound crazy at all what you just said. And of all the attorneys, I think per capita we have the most attorneys in New Jersey, but they're not all litigators. They're not all at some law firm doing litigation or corporate work. A lot of them, actually, because we have so many pharmaceuticals here in New Jersey, they are doing patent work, or they're doing public interest work. So that actually doesn't sound dumb at all. But then I have to ask you, what did you have a dream job? What did you have your eye on something in particular when you were going into law school? And how did you end up doing what you do now?
Yeah, so I think when I first went into law school, I thought I wanted to, be in Washington, D.C. I think a lot of people, that have interest in public policy and law, or politics in general, think they want to be in Washington, D.C. But over time, I think my perspective changed a lot. And you bring up a good point about making money and being successful as a lawyer. It really depends on, well, actually, and let me separate success, because success doesn't always equate money. Or,
Yes.
so, a lot of people think lawyers make a lot of money, which is a concerning misconception, because there are a lot of us who necessarily don't. So
Yeah.
I knew one thing for sure, that I didn't want to go into one of those big law firms and be, one of those, fancy associates, who, while they do a lot of cool things, it just wasn't my style at all. The other thing I knew, and I talked to this with one of my other partners a lot. We always talk about, well, if we wanted to make money, we wouldn't be doing education law.
Yeah.
Represent public entities. We represent, also just municipalities, counties, etc. And the billing rates there are, abysmal compared to, or at least the average lawyer would say that, right? But we don't do this because of the money, right? And so it's okay. And I still think that we are successful in our own regard, because just because we don't, make the hundred thousands of dollars a year, we're not privileged. We're still, at a much better place than a lot of other people are. So That being said, and I don't know where the transition was, but at some point I was like, I don't know if I necessarily want to go into federal government policy making. I don't see myself there yet. That's when I kind of switched gears to, okay, let me see what kind of jobs I can, find at a law firm, or doing, really learning to practice and be a lawyer. I did leave private practice for a little while and went to the Department of Education. That was kind of, because I kind of had a interest in going into government, going into the policy piece of it. So when I went to the Department of Ed, it was a great experience because I worked directly with the school law component, which was dealing with all the legal issues that are brought before the commissioner. But I also got to be part of the rulemaking process. That gave me a nice taste of what government work is. And what I realized is that I needed to come back to government work, whether federal or otherwise, at a later time in life. I just felt that I had a little bit more to do as an attorney and as a professional, and for my own professional growth, I came back to private practice.
Maybe politics,
Uh, you mean like
public office.
as a official myself?
Yes.
I
She's laughing. If you're ever in public office, I'm going to send you this video so you can see your reaction.
Yeah, so the reason I have that reaction is it's funny. So I people say I take after my grandfather who was a diplomat, and everybody, he knew everybody. He was very charming. I'm not even half as charming as he is. For lack of a better word, the social butterfly, you know? And so people say that because, no matter what environment you put me in, I'll figure it out. I'll navigate my way through that environment. I mean, I'm not going to say yes or no. I don't really know because, again, life changes. But I always feel like I'm probably better behind the scenes. I'm more of a behind the scenes type of person. I do think that folks who run for public office, folks who are public officials, need very strong people behind the scene to help them with their day to day, to help them make the right decisions, to help them navigate through their tenure or term within that office, and whatever they're planning. If I was like the face or the front person, I don't think, I would need good people behind me. And I rather like I be behind someone than me be the front person, if that makes sense.
Yes. No, I get that. And you're absolutely right. They absolutely do need a team of really good people behind them doing work behind the scenes, as with most things in life, right? But it's good to know which one you are. It's
Yeah.
good to know whether you want to be the person in the front, sort of the showman, so to speak, or one of the people behind the scenes. So, where did you go to law school? I'm not sure that we got to that part yet.
So I went to Rutgers, Newark, which is also known as the People's Electric Law School. And I think I mentioned that I needed a law school that was very much geared and focused on public interest, and Rutgers is one of the schools that is pretty well known for their public interest work and their groundbreaking and, dare I say, some of the time sometimes very radical work that they have done. At this point, I don't think I've ever mentioned it to people who don't know me personally. When I was applying to law school, my personal statement was very controversial at that time. Now it's like not that.
What was it?
I'm gonna get to that, and I think this is why I have a lot of respect for Rutgers too. I applied for law schools at a time where there were no protections for undocumented youth and undocumented individuals in this country. One of the things I came across during my time between law school and college, there were lots of students who were undocumented, not just within my community, but in communities across my state. And it was very challenging to have to navigate through the college process with them because you don't qualify for financial aid. Some schools will actually turn a blind eye and they'll give you internal aid, which that's awesome and progressive on their part. And other schools, you need the financial aid information, you need certain kinds of documentation. But what I realized is that here you have students who came here maybe as young as 6 months, as 2 years old, whatever, 10 years old, it doesn't matter. The point is they came here and, obviously people who come here aren't here just because they want to take advantage of the United States. It's because they're running away from something, and something horrific most of the time. Rarely did I come across people, if at all, that were, coming here and overstaying their visa and have all this money back home or whatever it may be. That's not the case in my experience. So I really one of my pieces about education at that time was also educational protection for students who were undocumented and children who were undocumented beyond, the K through 12 level. And so that's one of the things that I was really interested in. And I wrote, my personal statement was about undocumented youth and their right to education, or what should be their right to obtaining higher education without the risk of being deported to a country that they don't know, or at risk of being, discovered, and having similar opportunities as other students, or other children who were, had the privilege of being born here, right? I'm a naturalized citizen, so I think maybe there's a piece there where also it's like, oh, well, I'm an immigrant, so I understand what that
Yeah.
feels like, right? And here you have a particular immigrant population that's far more vulnerable. And so I do think that schools that accepted me despite that, I kudos to them. And when I first got to Rutgers, one of the deans actually pointed out to me, because she was on the application review committee or something, she pointed out the fact that she thought my personal statement was very much in line with the kind of, school Rutgers wants to be. So I felt that, I felt really good about that. But yeah, but basically what I'm saying is, like, despite knowing how radical at that time that position was, or how progressive at that position was, and I don't even think it's that progressive of a position, but
Well, I
uh,
think by today's standards,
it's
because things have changed, there's a lot of people that agree with that. So maybe at the time it was more controversial.
than it is.
Although maybe I'm just gauging it by the world that I'm in, because the world I'm in, the people that I surround myself with support it. So I know that there is still a lot of controversy around it to some degree. There are, I mean, we're living in a world now where immigration reform is a big issue. But when you wrote it, how did you know that it was controversial within the school?
So everybody told me, don't write about that.
Really?
But for me, because I'm headstrong, I was like, no, well, if I can be in a school community where I am not accepted for having certain beliefs, I mean, I've of course, that's just who, how I kind of approached it. And I was like, this will weed out, schools that really want to engage in real discourse of issues that face, that are relevant to our country, and that issues that are, in my opinion, relate to, human rights. And so for me, it was like, if schools didn't reject me for that, I don't think schools, I'm sure there are schools that look, schools that are supposed to look at the whole packet. And when I say school,
Yeah.
law schools. So if they're looking at the whole packet and that's the reason they reject me, not my, grades or my, LSATs or whatever, then, I don't need to be there. And somebody from the school that I specifically mentioned my personal statement led me to believe that, wow, this school really has a commitment. And it's not just, calling itself a public interest school or a progressive school, or a people's electric law school. It's actually is willing to have people who come from both sides of the fence. Because let me tell you, Rutgers wasn't, just because it's a people electric school doesn't mean there weren't people from very polar opposite sides of the fence, that there were. So it was kind of nice to know, it was gratifying to know that I was part of an educational system where at the time this topic was very controversial in this country, where it was okay to have a certain view that was very controversial, and at that point didn't feel very popular.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm probably forgetting how unpopular it was, because I'm kind of gauging it against how we are now. But that's really bold of you at that point in your career, very early in your legal career, to do that. And it's interesting because people always tell you when you go on a job interview, it's not just you trying to make a good impression on who's interviewing you, but you're also there to determine whether it's a good fit for you too. And it's interesting that you really saw it that way when you were applying to law schools, not just that you wanted to make yourself look good, like I want them to want me, but you wanted to make sure you want them too.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's necessarily the right way to approach life, but that's how I approach
I
life.
don't know. I don't know. I think maybe it is.
Because I'll give you another example. So like, I have a nose ring which is cultural, and I understand that it in some circles it may not be considered professional. And so when I've had people comment on me having a piercing on my nose, which is purely, a cultural aspect of my identity, I've already been like, okay, duly noted, because I can, if you have a problem with that, then maybe we will not mesh. If you're expecting me to take my nose ring off, you know, and
Yeah.
this is why I'm in a space, I'm in a firm, and I'm in a space where no matter who you are, you get to be yourself, as long as you are representing yourself and your clients in the firm in a manner that is consistent with our motto, which is, partners in our client success. And if it's silly things like a nose ring, it doesn't impact them, or which side of the fence you're from, it doesn't matter. And this is why I find environments like that, and I thrive in environments like that.
That's surprising to me that people still say things like that, although it shouldn't be surprising, but still surprises me when I hear things like that. So, but sounds like you were very bold and quite the trailblazer from a pretty young age. Where do you think you got that from?
Um, I would say the strong women in my family. We have some very generationally. All the women are very strong, even if some of them don't have formal education. They may not be, even if some of them were. So I hate when people say that, oh, just a housewife or whatever.
Mm, mhm.
um, those, whether they had careers or not, the women in my family are very bold and unapologetic about who they are. And that was, great for me to sort of model and mirror. I also think that my culture, even though I'm South Asian, I'm Bengali, and I do think in Bengali culture, there's also this, at least in my experience among my family and family friends, there's always this notion to be never be, harmful towards other, but do what's right, and don't be afraid of being yourself. And so if being myself is being, as you say, I think you said bold, or I don't even think I'm that bold compared to, other women that I know that have, been trailblazers. But yeah, I mean, if that's what it means, then that's what it is.
Well, that's what bold women always say, that they don't think they're being bold because they're not trying to be bold. They're not sitting there saying, "Well, how can I be bold today?" They're just being themselves. But I think that's really the beautiful part of it. They're being themselves. They're not holding back because they're afraid of what society is going to say about them. Right? Like you could easily have said, "Well, everybody thinks that I shouldn't write this on this topic, and I guess I shouldn't write it because if everybody else thinks that it's inflammatory, then I don't want to invite that." But being the bold person you are, you said, "No, this is what I'm passionate about and this is what I'm going to write about." And to me, that's the difference. That's where the boldness is and where the authenticity is.
Thank you.
So pat yourself on the back. I'm patting you on the back, virtual pat.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so, okay, so you're in law school. You've definitely decided education is something you're passionate about and you want to work in that area in some capacity. And Rutgers, it sounds like, was a really wonderful breeding ground for you to explore some of those things. So I wouldn't mind going back to those years again. And law school too, taking advantage of those opportunities to learn there, because you have those resources around you where there's professors and seasoned professionals that want to teach young people how to be lawyers and how to advocate, because that's something you don't necessarily know how to do right out of law school, right? Is how to be a lawyer and how to represent people. So, what did you do right out of law school?
So my first year, I clerked for a judge in Jersey City in Hudson County, Hudson Vicinage. That was a very interesting year because that was the year that my judge ended up in a chancery rotation, and she was still doing special civil matters, that all the judges end up having to do. So it was a really crazy year, but that year my judge took the time to really mentor me, and when she needed to, she was very hard on me to make sure that I really took advantage of that clerkship, and learned a lot in that clerkship, because that clerkship really set the tone for how my work product, my work ethic, and how I approach the law, how I analyze things. Because yeah, law school teaches you like the basic skills, but you really learn in the practice of law, right? So after the clerkship ended, I went to a boutique school law firm. And, one of the things that I really appreciated going while at the firm, because it was very high paced, the expectations were very high, very, very, very accomplished and intelligent and hardworking, attorneys that work there. So, I had a challenge. I was like, oh my God, now I've got to be just as awesome as these people are.
Can you help me with what kind of work were you doing as a school lawyer? Because I don't do that area. And I don't think there really are many attorneys that do that line of work. So I'm a little unclear exactly in what kind of work it is. So can you explain that?
Absolutely. And you know what? Until you have like lived a day in our shoes, even if we explain it to you, you're going to be like, oh, okay. And the reason I say it is because I really want people to just see how, because I love this work. So I really want people to see how like fascinating, crazy, and unpredictable our day to day can be. So as a general matter, so we represent primarily public school districts. And as a general matter, most of these public schools are, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of budget, right? Annual budget. So think of the school district essentially as a company or a corporation. The board of education is basically their board of directors. The superintendent of schools is the chief, CEO basically. So, and then you have the CEO's cabinet, which are the assistant superintendents, the HR, and whoever else they have. Every school has its differently set up. So we are counsel to this entire entity. Some, we have school districts that their operating budgets range from, from the school districts we represent, they range anywhere from, $100 million to like $700 million. So that this is what these are the people we're dealing with. And the reason I mentioned the numbers and the money is because I think people look at schools and don't understand what happens behind the scenes. And, they go and vote for, the Board of Education elections, not realizing how important it is who they vote for and the impact that has on their child's education and on the policies that are implemented and how the monies are spent, So that being said, on a day-to-day basis, we serve as general counsel to a lot of our districts. Not all districts, because some districts have their own law firms or in-house counsel that serve as general counsel. So what does it mean as general counsel? We deal with a lot of issues that come up as a result of board governance, because schools and education are one of the most regulated areas of government. And so, school board members also have certain rules and regulations and laws that they are bound to. So we deal with a lot of board governance issues that come up. A lot of times, day-to-day operations of schools entail consideration of legal issues, consideration of what the statutes and regulations require. So a lot of our work entails, advising on and ensuring compliance with the laws and regulations. And then, of course, there's the other piece of it, which is being a labor and employment attorney. So, because when you're dealing with a large entity like a school district, in some communities, they're the largest employer in that entire community. So here you have all these employees that have, employment related matters, labor negotiations. We do labor negotiations when every year we'll have anywhere between 5 to 6 different entities that we're or labor and unions that we're negotiating with. And then of course the day-to-day, the typical labor employment stuff that comes up. Then there's the third piece of it, which is the clients, what I call the clients for the school district, which are the parents and the students and the community. And with regard to that, there are all these laws around, student entitlement, student discipline, HIB, residency. There's so many components that go into dealing with families, whether it be special education related, whether it be discipline related, whatever it may be, or just in general student rights and responsibilities. We deal with those pieces as well when issues come up relating to that. And then last but not least, any kind of litigation that arises, whether it's employment, whether it's district suing district, whether it's, student, a lot of times it's special ed related. So we wear a lot of hats. The workday is never the same. It's never predictable. So I will legitimately have, on one given day, it will be call after call after call or meeting. Now a lot of things are Zoom. It's nice, so I don't have to be jutting around the state all day. And then at night, I'm working on the substantive pieces of being a lawyer, whether it's writing briefs, whether it's reading documents, and then editing things. And of course, we have a team of associates because there is always so much to be done, so much to be looked at. And even when you've been in this space for, for some of the attorneys in our office, they've been in this space for decades, and others, only a decade or a few years. You're constantly learning. There are constantly nuances. The issues never change. COVID completely, brought in a whole new other host of issues, because the two things that don't shut down during any kind of, or even if it shuts down, what I mean is like the responsibility are never shifted in any kind of emergency or anything that's going on, especially a pandemic, for instance. Are local governments, which we represent, and school districts, right, which we also represent. So COVID brought on a whole other slew of challenges. So this year was also learning year and trying to figure out what we're supposed to be doing and how we're supposed to be assisting in our clients and helping our clients make those decisions. So yeah, a typical day is really interesting for us. And in addition, I should mention a lot of our nights are also taken booked by like going to board meetings, council meetings. So our lifestyle is very different from the average, attorney that you may see on a day-to-day basis.
It sounds like a little bit like corporate counsel.
Yes. It is. It sounds, yeah, it is. It is more or less corporate counsel. But what I've learned from meeting all these in-house people is they farm everything out. So we are basically the ones keeping, doing all the work. The firms are, some school districts have in-house counsel that handle a lot of the day-to-day. But then when there's litigation going on, it gets farmed out to us. And yes, I mean, corporate counsel is the best way to put it. But with schools and even with municipalities, all you need is one little thing to happen in one of your school districts and it completely derails, the entire day. It could be something as and innocuous is the wrong word, but it could be something as simple as like a flooding, in one district, or something as horrific as a bomb threat or whatever it may be. It still requires, because behind the scene, they're consulting us as well, us as in their attorneys, and making sure they're doing what they need to do. And while the school administrators are very well trained and equipped and have all the experience to handle the situation on the grounds, they also need to make sure that in terms of compliance and next steps, they're consulting us on how to handle issues.
It sounds like you are wearing so many hats. I mean, at my law firm, I do one thing, I do divorce law. Are you personally wearing all those hats, or do you have certain aspects of it that you handle? For instance, like the labor and employment.
So at the firm, we have made sure that folks who specialize in certain areas. So while I have a overview understanding of the public contracts law and procurement and bidding, there are folks in our firm who specialize in it and who are basically going to be my go-to if I have a question that is beyond the basics, beyond what I know of procurement and or maybe a public bidding question that's very nuanced or interesting, that's outside of the scope of what I know. A lot of times we have very complicated health benefits or some of the leaves like FMLA or NJ. FLA type of leave questions. While I know the basics of it, there may be a very nuanced question that I would ask somebody else from the firm. So that's the great thing about having full service firm, but also a full service firm within which there's a dedicated education practice group where different people with varied experiences. On an average day, I'm wearing all sorts of hats, sometimes all at the same time. My clients are calling me about special ed issues. My clients are calling me about, employment issues. Clients are calling about general, school law issues. And the reason I'm able to do that and jump from topic to topic, or even some obscure board governance question, I'll be like, I think that's what it is, let's just double check, or and this is what makes logically the most sense. I was able to do that because of my past experiences, right? I was at this boutique school law firm that are just excellent at what they do, and they've been doing this for too long, or very long, I shouldn't say too long. And then of course being at the department and really getting the insight and the really understanding the nitty gritty of pieces of the law. So, in that sense, it's very unique because I do come across attorneys that have far more years of practical experience than I do, but may not have the same knowledge. And it kind of, and I don't mean attorneys from within the firm, like, people that I come across outside who then feel some type of way about, here's this girl who's like child, like in their eyes. And, I'm just like, listen, no, I know what I'm talking about. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I think we've all experienced that, but then once you demonstrate that you're a grown up and you're intelligent and capable, I think that opinion changes quickly. So I want to ask you, when if litigation comes up, because it sounds like you do some litigation, but what would be some examples of litigation that you would do for a school board?
Sure. So, employment litigation is one of our big ones. So, employment litigation comes up in the typical judicial as well as quasi judicial forms. So, there could be claims filed in superior court or federal court relating to employment discrimination, and maybe SEPA claims or NJ Lat, you name it. Those would be filed there. But then, because we also we're primarily dealing with a lot of the employees being members of labor unions and public employees, there may be grievances that are filed internally that end up in arbitration. You also have the commissioner of education, who is basically authorized under the school laws of the state to review and determine the outcome of any kind of controversies and disputes that arise under the school laws of the state. So the school laws of the state include not just the statutes, but also the regulations that are promulgated by the commissioner. So anytime there's an alleged violation of the school laws of the state by an employee, or there's a alleged violation of the school board policies, or anything that relates to certain areas of employment, that can also be filed before the commissioner. So that's what's fun about this area, because you get to practice administrative law, you get to just be a litigator, engage in the discovery and all the other things that you do. Doesn't matter which tribunal you're before. But then the other kind of litigation that we also deal with a lot after employment is special ed. And so the special ed litigation, again, they're filed with the Department of Ed in New Jersey, which also get heard before the Office of Administrative Law. We also have a special litigation that will end up in federal court, and our firm has several right now that are in federal court. In addition to that, we'll have litigation relating to, let's say, alleged violations of OPRA or OPMA, the Open Public Records Act or the Open Public Meetings Act, or litigation between schools over payment of tuitions or variety of disputes. So as you can see, there are different tribunals that we end up before in litigation. But in addition to litigation, one of the other things that take up a lot of our time too, when there are different types of investigations that are being conducted by various state and federal agencies, whether it be the Division of Civil Rights, the Office of Civil Rights, the sometimes it's PERC, sometimes it's the Department of Ed. So there are lots of moving pieces, and we're constantly there's never a moment where we're not busy. So anytime I'm about to say, oh, I might have a lull, I stop myself because I'm going to just jinx myself and into, what we try to do is avoid all that in the first place, right? So our work is to be preventive. And part of being preventive is making sure that our administrators, again, when I mentioned the day-to-day operations and making sure compliance with laws and regulations is taking place, but it's not going to stop somebody who really needs to feels like they have been wronged or feels the need to be vindicated to go still file something. Whether there's merit in that is completely different from them filing something. We try to prevent things from escalating, but we can't. It's unfortunately, New Jersey is probably one of the most litigious states that, from what I hear and from what I've seen, and so we will have plenty of litigation going on. Fortunately, we have a large group of associates that really help us because God help. I don't think I could handle all of this on my own. So while it seems like I'm wearing a lot of hats, and I am, we have a team that helps me make sure everything is also working. So from my assistant, who is like God sent, I don't know what I would do without her, to all the associates that helped, all the partners that consult. So yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say you're doing a lot. I mean, I do one practice area. So even though you technically do one practice area, which I'm putting in finger quotes, it under that umbrella are so many different things. So your original intent and the passion that you had for education law in the first place, which we talked about, is that satisfied with the work that you're doing now? And if yes, how so?
Right now I am very content with where I am professionally, as well as where I am in terms of my career, because yes, the original intent was not just to be a band-aid. And there's nothing wrong with band-aids. We do need band-aids too, and while I have sort of deviated from also wanting to do more policy work, I did get to do a little bit of that at the department. But what I've noticed is the importance of being a behind the scenes person in the operation of the school district, because if from a school district level you are assisting the school districts and the boards in doing what they are entrusted in doing, which is educating. And in New Jersey, we have what, 1.4 million students. So, we don't even see a quarter of those students, but we represent a lot of large districts and we see a lot of students. So if we can help them do what they're interested in doing, which is educating our future and making sure that the services that are necessary are provided, the resources are there, and helping them improve on what they do, to me it serves a greater purpose than just sitting in some high tower and writing policy that impact the trenches without being in the trenches, if that makes sense. And the reason I say that is because I see how, having switched from place to place and being both in government and now back to private practice and actually being in the trenches, I realize how sometimes policy can impact, we don't realize how it will impact the folks who have to implement it and folks who are subject to it. So, it can be frustrating sometimes when you get a directive or guidance or even a change in regulation and you're like, y'all were not thinking about us and how it's gonna, so it's nice to have that. And then hopefully in the future I can use that to whether it be transition to a place where I can assist in developing more policies and but at least not, for me it's almost like learning so that I can be better in the future, and learning so that if in the future there is an opportunity to do something on a larger scale, I'll be better equipped.
You've been doing this long enough to have observed where you feel like maybe there are some gaps where the law could be better to benefit the public and maybe, well, whoever, the school board, the teachers, their ability to provide a good quality education to the public, or if it's something that would be beneficial to the public. Can you share any of those things that you've observed?
So I think one of the biggest challenges, and one of our clients, all our clients that we work with, their biggest hindrances in being able to fully do what the potential is for that district and for those students is funding. School funding has been an ongoing fight for, as even before either of us were born, and from all the way from like the original Abbott litigations to through to the present. And so school funding is something that I could spend an entire podcast talking about it, so I'm not going to go
We'll
too.
have to have you come back on.
But school funding that I've is something, from a policy standpoint, that I've always felt very, very strongly about. And school funding is something that on a state level, we really need to take a closer look, because the funding formula, the current funding formula clearly is not working. And one of the other pieces of it, and it may go hand in hand with school funding, is considering, and I think there has been some talks most recently, as in the last couple of years, about the potential for regionalization of certain districts. I don't know. I mean, I don't think enough studies, or not, I shouldn't say studies, but enough work has been done to really look at the impact. But that is something that may go hand in hand with alleviating some of the funding issues, but also looking at school funding at a closer level, because every year some of the communities that have the most need, their budgets keep getting cut, and then there are school districts with that, based on what community it is, seem to have very little impact even when budgets are cut, because of how property taxes are funding the districts, the size of the district. So all of that really matters. When I was at Rutgers, there were always groups of people who always took issue with the fact that some of the urban school districts get more funding from the state than some of the suburban and wealthier school districts. Well, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that there are funding gaps on a local level, and there are different needs and varied needs depending on what kind of community you come from. So, I think there's that difficulty with people feeling like, oh, why are some people getting quote unquote handouts or getting more than others? Well, there's a reason why some communities have a greater need, and even then, budgets are being slashed. So I do think that the funding is one area that money's supposed to solve that problem, but where do we get the money from and how it's reallocated? All that needs to be looked at.
Well, that is definitely an issue that our respective practice areas have in common, because there's often not enough money to go around in a divorce either, which is the challenge, is making sure that both people can walk away with enough. So I don't know. This is a problem I don't think we're going to solve on today's podcast.
We won't. But if somebody wants some input, I'm happy to give them my rookie perspective.
Maybe Mark Zuckerberg will donate more money. I know he gave a lot of money to Newark, but or I was just reading this morning that Mackenzie Scott, formerly Bezos, who is the richest woman in the world, just donated something like, it was a crazy amount of money, $50 million to different schools that are low on funding. So maybe she'll listen to this and she will consider giving.
Yeah, I mean, a part of it definitely is the not just the funds themselves, but the allocation of funds also, where the need is and how to utilize it is something that we really need to look at as well.
I like to end each interview with about 5 questions that are tended to be quick.
Okay.
What would you be doing if you weren't a lawyer?
Probably working at a nonprofit that work with youth.
If you won $100 million in the lottery and you didn't have to work anymore or worry about money, what would you be doing? What would you choose to do with your time?
Probably create actually a community, actually a couple of different things. One, I want my own yoga studio slash natural foods slash community space for community events in a nice little warehouse, or big warehouse, I should say. And two, I would love to start a community organization that helps students or help fill the gaps in areas where parents aren't able to meet, provide students something as simple as, school supplies, and let's say kids go to school where their uniforms are required, uniforms, things like that. So some sort of a foundation that work with youth and work with families. So that would be something I would love to do.
That sounds like such a great idea. I feel like you could do that anyway. I know, but you pressed for time already as it is, right?
So funny you say that. My husband and I have been talking about that a lot, and it's a matter of finding time from the 16 to 20-hour days that we have that we work. Some most days we're like working 16 hours,
Yes.
20 hours.
Well, again, Mackenzie Scott, if you're listening, here's another opportunity to give back. If you were writing life's instruction manual, what would rule number one be?
You know what? This is going to be very cliche, probably for, when people hear it, but treat others and yourself with respect.
Well, it's rule number one. So it's meant to be basic, right? But that's really profound too.
Yeah, because it's a lot harder to be, mean. I was going to use a different word, but
Yeah.
I had to censor myself. It's a lot harder to be mean or disrespectful. It's so much more natural and easier to be just respect yourself and respect others. So
Well, you know what? If you're a positive person like you are, but there are a lot of people that are really profoundly unhappy. And that saying misery loves company is true.
yeah, that's true. Listen, it doesn't mean that you don't have moments that you are enraged or upset about something. It'll happen, and you may react in a way that you either later regret, or you wouldn't have reacted if you had a little bit more time to think about it. But like as a standard base, like just treating, remembering to constantly respect others is really important.
I think that's important too. And I think sometimes we can forget, especially living in this Northeast area where we are, where everyone's always in such a hurry and we're sort of notoriously mean here. If you ask someone in the Midwest who's been here, they'll tell you that. But I think we can forget sometimes when we're in a hurry and we have tunnel vision. We're focused on something that we have to get done. I know I'm guilty of this. I'm trying to be nicer. So thank you for the reminder.
No, no, same here. I'm not, listen, I forget too. That's why that would be my first rule.
Yes, yes. What person do you most admire and why?
I feel like I have to come up with, like when you first hear that, you're like, oh, you have to come up with a cool answer. But honestly, like when I think about someone I most admire, I don't know if I go through life necessarily like having one person I admire. I try to learn from folks, and I appreciate what other folks bring to the table. But one person that really stands out in more recently in my life, and definitely is a role model, and I truly admire his grind day in and day out, and he's been doing this longer than I have, and I don't know how on earth he does it, is actually one of my managing partner, Lester Taylor. He truly is an admirable and a model individual within the profession, and so I would say, yeah, Lester
We'll
Taylor.
have to make sure that he listens to this so he knows that.
Yeah. Oh, don't tell him that though, because then he's gonna start feeling himself. I'm kidding. But yeah.
Well, he should listen to this. He should be listening to it. All right. Final question. What would you tell your 20-year-old self?
20, that would have been like in the middle of college, right? Something you mentioned really struck me, was about, college is the one time you get to really learn and spend that time learning. My 20-year self, I would say that to my 20-year self, because I didn't come from the financial means or background that people might think, because I'm in a different place in life now. And so, I had three jobs during college, like side jobs. And then during, and even during the summer, I didn't get to like travel or intern at cool places. Everything I did was primarily, trying to make as much money as I can to deal with living expenses and personal experience expenses, and, even book expenses for college, etc. But I think one thing I lost sight of was the opportunity to take really interesting classes and really focus on the academics. And I wish I did that more, and trying to find ways where I could, learn more while I was in college. So yeah, I would say that.
Well, I think you're in your calling and you have a very impressive background, and I can't wait to see what else you're going to do.
Yeah, I can't either. I'll see what's next.
Yeah, you don't even know yet.
I don't even know yet.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your background and your history. I really enjoyed it. I hope that you enjoyed it too.
Absolutely. This was so much fun. And so, coming in, I was very anxious and nervous, because that's just my personality, because I like to be prepared and I like to know what I'm getting into. And while I knew that, this was just going to be a conversation, I just want to say, talking to you has just been so easy. It has a lot to do with you, and just being able to just chat like girlfriends, over a cup of, coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, literally.
Virtually.
Thank you so much for the compliments. I appreciate it. And I think everyone's going to enjoy your interview.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.